Okay friends, it's time to get started on our front end work. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure you have hand and eye protection for all this job. Aside from that, go ahead and safely raise and support your Jeep so the front wheels are off the ground. When you do that, you want to make sure you have your jack stands on the pinch rail. Let's get started. Now that we have the wheel up off the ground, let's continue on by removing all of our lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel off, let's continue on by removing our axle nut cotter pin and nut. Use a 32mm socket to remove the nut. And of course, remove the washer as well. Now let's just go ahead and push on this axle. You want to make sure that it breaks free from the wheel bearing. If it doesn't, use a punch, come right in the center with your hammer, and make sure that it's free like this. Now to remove the strut, we're of course going to have to remove our sway bar link. If you're not replacing the sway bar link, you can put a socket in the center here and then use a wrench along the nut, and that should be able to remove it without damaging it. Now when it's time to remove the strut from the knuckle, of course we're going to take out those bolts and we're going to have to pull the knuckle away. That's going to put a little bit of tension on our flex hose and our ABS wire, so we need to make sure we give them a little bit of slack. Let's remove this lower bolt, and then we'll remove this upper bolt up here. Now that we have plenty of slack right here, let's continue on by removing our two bolts right here. You're going to have a bolt that comes through from the rear to the front, holding it on by a nut. I'm going to hold the bolt side and then remove the nut side. A couple loving bonks with our rubber mallet. Now we can separate these. And now let's get under the hood. All right, where we're going to be working is right here. So the nuts that we're going to remove is this one right here, this one right there, and this one. I'll remove two, start the third, and then I need to reach under, hold the strut, and then finish up. There it is, friends. Now it's time to install our brand new strut. I'm just going to line up the studs with the holes in the body. We'll slide it up and start our nuts. Next, you want to inspect your mounting bolts. If they look as though they're damaged, you're going to have to replace them. If they look like they're in good condition but need to be cleaned, go ahead and clean them off and let's get ready for an install. Now we're going to lift up the knuckle and line it up with our strut holes, then put our bolts through from the rear to the front. There's one. Grab your mounting nuts, start those on as well. Now let's go ahead and bottom these out, and then we'll torque them to manufacturer's specifications. Now let's torque these to 81 foot-pounds. Now we're going to start putting in the bolts that hold our ABS and brake hose to their mounting points. So of course we have one right here and one right up there. I'm just going to use a little bit of copper never seize, and then we'll start putting them in. You'll notice that your strut has two holes here. One's threaded, one isn't. If you were to look at the back side, you can see that it has a little piton. The piton fits inside the non-threaded. Start that bolt in. Start in the upper one as well. Snug them up. Double check to ensure everything's nice and secure. Now it's time to put our sway bar link back in here. Go ahead and slide that in. We'll start on our nut. Now if you wanted to, you can hold the center so the stud doesn't spin, and then tighten this with a ratchet. Or of course, you can just hold the backside carefully with some vice grips, being careful not to damage your boot, and then of course you can snug it up that way. After it's snugged up, torque it to 43 foot-pounds. Now let's put on our axle washer. And of course the axle nut. Now you're just going to bottom this out and then we'll torque it to 180 foot-pounds. To torque this to 180 foot-pounds, it's going to be easiest using a long pry bar coming across a couple of the studs and then down to the ground. That's going to help prevent this from rotating on you. Now we're going to pay attention to putting in the cotter pin. What we want to pay attention to is the slots on the nut and then of course the hole that's in the axle. So of course you're going to want to rotate this until you can find the hole in the axle. Once you've found the hole, we're going to continue on to tightening the nut until the very next slot lines up. Once it lines up, put in your locking cotter pin. And then we're going to pin it over so there's no way this nut can loosen up on us. Okay, let's get our wheel back up on here. We'll snug up the lug nuts, get the wheel so it's just barely touching the ground, and then torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Now with the wheel on the ground, we'll continue on to torquing the lug nuts in a crisscross manner. Torqued. So now with the weight of the vehicle back on the ground and the wheel fully torqued, let's continue on by snugging these up and then we're going to torque them to 35 foot-pounds. Okay friends, we got it all back together. Now all you have to do is go ahead and safely road test your Jeep down to your local alignment shop.